first key in order to making a good decision is what? Is spending time with whom? With the Father. If you have your Bibles, open up to the book of Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. And we're going to be looking at verses 11 and 12, verses 12 through 19. And read along with me as we get into this passage. Okay. Luke 6, verses 12 to 19. It was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. And day came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, and James and John, and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot. Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Jesus came down with them and stood on a level place, and there was a large crowd of his disciples, and a great throng of people from all Judea and Jerusalem, and the coastal region of Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were being cured. And all the people were trying to touch him, for power was coming from him and healing them. May God add the blessing to the reading of his word. Have you ever had to make a really big decision? I know that I have. We all have had times where we've had to make really, really difficult decisions that required a lot of thought, a lot of really thinking it through, things that could be life-changing. How did you prepare for that decision? Who did you consult when making that decision? Did you just make a decision? Oh, I'm just going to make the decision. I'll just make the best choice. What happened as a result, and then what happened as a result of your decision after you made that decision? What were the results of that? That's what people do today. When people make decisions, people think when they have a really big decision, well, I need to purchase a house, or I need to find a mate for my life, or I need to make a financial decision. I need to do this, or I need to do this, I need to do this. And people face those kinds of decisions on a regular basis, don't they? Well, how do they do it? What do they do in order to make the best possible decision that they can do in order to make the best choice? Today, Jesus was exactly in that type of situation. Well, Jesus had to make a decision. Of course, Jesus had to make a decision. Jesus had one of probably the biggest decisions of his life. And Jesus spent it says here that Jesus spends the whole night in prayer before he goes down and he chooses the 12 apostles that would take and lead his church. And then once he chooses them, then he goes on to ministry and to ministering to people and acts as a one who is discipling his apostles and showing them this is the way ministry is once I'm gone. So Jesus had to take time to pray, to choose, but also Jesus had to take time to show his disciples what it was to minister. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at 3 points. Pray, choose, and disciple. So 3 simple points. Pray, choose, and disciple. Our first point, pray. It was at that time that he went off to the mountain to pray and spent the whole night in prayer to God. That's a long time. Generally, a whole night, I was thinking, if it's normal, for a normal adult, that would be like 8 hours. If you're going to sleep, you're going to see like 8 or 9 hours of sleep. For some of us, maybe that might be longer. But think about spending 8 or 9, 10 hours in prayer. That would be pretty tough, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Sometimes it's difficult for us to spend a few moments in prayer, let alone hours of prayer. And I know I know it's difficult for me to spend long hours or long times and long periods in prayer. But Jesus, he said he was God, so why did he need to pray? Why did he just didn't he just have an open communication with his Father? Of course. But he was still a human, and he still had a relationship with his Father, and he still knew that when he needed to make a decision, he needed to do what? He needed to pray. And this was a pretty big decision, I would say. Because if we're going to look at the next verse, we're going to find out what that decision was. But the reality is that Jesus knew that just because he was God, just because he was the Father's Son, didn't mean that he didn't need to pray to his Father. He did not need to not pray. Because he knew that he needed to make the right choices, didn't he? He needed to know that he needed to make the right decision, the right thing to do. What are you going to do? And so he spent the whole night in prayer. And what was he doing? And what was prayer? And prayer is that communication with God, isn't it? Where it's just not us speaking to him, but it's him, God, speaking to us. And so what's happening is that prayer was happening was Jesus was communicating, but he was also listening and listening clearly for what the Father was saying. What are you saying, God? Okay, what are you saying? What are you saying? God speaks that way. When we know God in prayer, and we really know him genuinely, we're really close with him, and we spend that time with him in prayer, we're able to, especially extended periods of time, we're able to understand what he's saying. We're able to hear what he's saying. And we're able to say, okay, God, I got it. And what happens there at that point? It happens is that when we hear from him, then we're less likely to make a mistake when we have to make that big decision, isn't it? Because we're hearing from God. It's when we make the mistake in our big decision is when we don't take the time to hear from him and we rush into things that we shouldn't rush into without first hearing from him. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because the reality is that God wants to speak to us. He wants us to guide us and lead us. He says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Yes, but he wants to guide us and lead us as well. And show us the right way to go. I will teach you and guide you in the way in which you should go. It says that in the Old Testament. And it says, don't be like the horse where the bridle in his mouth, where he has to be led by the rider. He has to turn it because it puts pain in the horse's mouth to get him to turn left or get him to turn right. He says, don't be like that, where God has to cause you difficulty in order for you to get to do what he wants you to do, in order for him to help you to make the right decision and choice in your life. So the reality is that the first key in order to making a good decision is what? Is spending time with whom? With the Father, isn't it? Absolutely. Another thing is the scripture talked about is there's wisdom in when you seek out, consult others, godly wisdom. There's wisdom in counsel. So that's another part of it. We're not going to get into that today, but we're talking about prayer here, but that's another part of it. It's getting godly wisdom and godly counsel. But the reality is that the first thing to making a decision is we've got to pray. And we've got to take time to pray and make sure that we hear from the Lord and what he's saying and what he's doing. He may tell us what not to do. He may tell us what to do, and he may tell us what not to do. Okay, you better not do this. Do this, but don't do this. Because if you do, you could cause yourself some harm or danger or trouble. So that's the first step. Secondly, is that once we have time with him, then we have the direction that we need, then we can go ahead and do what he calls us to do. What was the next thing that Jesus was going to do? And this is a big thing. He knew before he was going to go into prayer that he needed to do this the next day. He was going to choose who? He was going to choose his apostles. And who were the apostles? The apostles means, the word literally in the Greek means one who is sent, or an emissary, or an ambassador. But these were specific to these 12 individuals. Yeah, there's a gift of apostleship. Apostleship can be like a missionary. But in this case, these guys were more specific. They were the ones who were going to lead what the church once Jesus was gone. So Jesus better do a darn good job at finding out from the Father who is the ones that he wants to lead his church. He better hear from God and better know, without a doubt, who is the ones who are going to lead the church, because they're the ones who they're the ones who are going to lead the church once he's gone, and once he's gone, they're the ones who are going to direct it and how the church is going to go. And that's really important. That's why he spent the whole night in prayer, because he needed to know exactly who these men were. Now, mind you, the men that we're going to look at, most of them were uneducated. They were fishermen, blue-collar, so to speak, people that were working hard. So why wouldn't he choose, and we're going to find out, why wouldn't he choose someone that was someone that went to school, that had all these degrees? I'm not saying you don't look at those things are important. But he heard specifically from the God who his Father, who the ones were that he was going to pick. And that's important because God looks at the heart. It says in 1 Samuel, it says, God does not look at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And this is when they were talking about David, when they're choosing David, because he took all of the 7 other brothers before him, and he said, there are none of them. And they were all tall and handsome, and David was the last one of the family. But God said, I look at his heart, rather than looking at the outward appearance. And sometimes what happens is when we're making decisions, we look at the outward appearance of things. And we base our decision based on the outward things that we see, rather than what God is saying is what he wants. That's important, because that's why we need to hear clearly from God. And in this case, his men are going to be leading the church once he's gone, and so he needs to know who they are, regardless of what they look on the outside. Regardless of what their appearance and their background is, they need to know who they are specifically, because this is what God said. These are the people that God said. Let me give you an example. Would I have chosen me? No. I wouldn't. Not based on outward appearance, being a drug addict and alcoholic and rebellious and giving my parents a hard way to go every corner I could. Rebellious. Angry. I wouldn't have chosen me. But God did. God knew, right? And each one of us, God knows our hearts. You know, how many people would have chosen us, right? But God did, didn't he? Because he saw our hearts. That's the same thing it is when God making decisions and God choosing people, is that God sees the hearts, and that's why we need to have time with him to know who his people, who he wants, and to lead his church, and to guide his church, and to guide his people, and to do the work that he called us to do. That's important. Let's look at some of these people, some of these men. And when the day came, he called his disciples to them, and he chose 12 of them. So here are his followers that are following him, and he chooses, out of all the people that are following him, he chooses 12 specifically. And he also named apostles. Again, remember, it's one who is sent, but it's also like an ambassador or an emissary. And it says Simon, who also named Peter, who generally would lead the church, and his brother Andrew. So Simon and Andrew are what? Brothers. Okay? And Peter is the fiery one. He's the one who's he's constantly having foot and mouth disease. You know what I mean by foot and mouth disease? He's saying stuff and doing stuff before he thinks about what he should be saying and thinking. Gets himself in trouble. But Jesus saw past all his idiosyncrasies, and he said, I'm going to choose him. And it said, and he named him Simon, and upon this rock, and his name was originally named was Simon. They called him Peter, which means Petros. Petros means what? Rock. He said, upon this rock I will build my church. So the reality was, God saw past Peter's idiosyncrasies and said, he's one of one I want, and I want his brother Andrew to carry on the church. James and John, who were also brothers, they were known as what? Sons of thunder. Because they had a reputation for being what? For having tempers. So they're getting angry. Again, I talked about this a couple weeks ago, but they were known, especially John. John was known at the end of writing 1 John, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And what does he talk about in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John? And even the Gospel of John, what is he known? It talks about love, doesn't he? He was no longer a son of thunder, but he was a son of love, where he learned to be able to love people and deal with people in love. So that's important. And it goes on, and we find that James was actually the first martyr. He was the one that was killed at the hands of the Apostle Paul. He was the first martyr. You read that in the book of Acts. He was stoned to death. Okay, but let's go on here. It says, James and John and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas. Matthew was a tax collector. Thomas was a doubter. James the son of Alphaeus. And Simon, who was called the Zealot. And then Judas the son of James. And then Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. So we see here, these were all handpicked. And Jesus even picked Judas Iscariot for whatever reasons he had in mind. He knew what he was doing. He didn't find out later, I don't know, I didn't know this about Judas before I picked him. Of course he knew all that. He knew all that. But there was a reason why he did it. And there was a choice that he made while making that decision about Judas Iscariot. He did it for a reason. So we don't always understand that reason, but he did it anyway, and he knew what he was doing. But each one of these men were people that he knew exactly who they were and what they were about, and he chose them for a very purpose of establishing what? His church. And doing his church. And doing what the work that he had called them to do, to carry on, so that they could not only could he teach them, but so they could also teach others. And so the idea there is, the whole idea of 2 Timothy 2:2 is that these things which you have heard in the presence of many witnesses, teach them, the faithful men who will also be able to teach others. 2 Timothy 2:2, I encourage you to read that. That's a discipleship verse. Jesus was teaching these men. He chose them not only to take over the church, but for them to teach, so he could teach them, but also they could teach others, and then others could teach others, and others could teach others, and others could teach others. So it's a reciprocal process. So if he never had anybody to teach, if he never appointed anybody, what happens when Jesus passed away? There wouldn't be anybody to what? Lead the church once he's gone, would there be? Absolutely not. And so this is the whole point of Jesus. What Jesus had to do was what? He had to pray. But he had to choose wisely. He had to choose whom the Father said and what the Father said to do. And that's really, really, really important. To do, when God shows you to do something, then you do it. You follow his instructions explicitly. You follow the details of what he tells you to do. Once you know it, you do it. Because then you can ensure that the plans that you have and the things that you're doing and the decision that you're making is going to be right. And it's going to be the right way to go, and it's going to be the right thing to do. It's that once God shows you, you follow the details and you do what he tells you to do. And what did Jesus do? He did what the Father showed him to do by picking these 12 men. And so it's really, really critically important for us to know that. Number one, again, to pray. Number two is to choose wisely and to choose and make the decision according to what God tells us to do. And then number 3 is that it's to disciple. And this is really important. Most people look at verses 17 through 19 as just another time of Jesus doing healings and miracles and deliverances of people who had demonic spirits. And yet it is true. That's what it's about. But also, they miss the point. They miss the point of the context of the Scripture. Is that Jesus was doing what? He was prepared to teach the men he just chose. Look at this. These verses come out and they do what? These verses come right after he chose them, didn't they? And what was the first thing that Jesus did? And came down with them and stood at a level place, and there was a large crowd of his disciples. And people from Judea, Jerusalem, and the coastal regions of Tyre. So it was a whole group of people. And Jesus knew they were going to be there. Jesus was prepared. But what he wanted to do was that he wanted to not only to heal people, not only to show people grace, but also he wanted to do what? He wanted to show his disciples, his apostles, his people, what they needed to do in order to, if you want to be successful in the work that I've called you to do here, then this is how you do it. And a good leader will always show his people, will always show those whom he has to follow them what to do and how to do it the right way. Have you ever been shown something, or somebody's trying to teach you something and they show you the wrong way to do it? And then you end up doing it the wrong way and it messes you up? How about, and conversely, have you ever had someone show you the right way to do something, and once you've done it, it's like, that's great, it shows you the right way to do it, and now you do it, that's the way you do it, and that's the way, and you know you're supposed to do it. Like with me riding a bike. When somebody taught, my big brother Bob, taught me how to ride my bike for the first time, and I did it, and he taught me the right way. And once he did that, I never forgot. Or tying my shoes, or any of those things. Those things are like, there's talk about little things, but when it's really important to know that to be able to teach people the right way. If you've been taught the right way, and yet someone has taught you, then you need to be able to teach others. And that's what was happening here. Jesus was teaching his newly appointed apostles, newly chosen apostles, how to do it the right way. Because he did what? He spent time in prayer with the Father. He chose whom the Father had chosen, called him to choose, but then he also showed them, or discipled them. Disciple means to make a disciple, to show them like little Christ. That's what a Christian means. It means little Christ. And so, but that only comes by people showing them how to live a Christian life. It's by someone else modeling it for them. How would you ever know how to be a Christian if someone didn't model it for you, before you? How to hear, how to live, how to walk with God if someone didn't show you. And so the apostles didn't know. They didn't know how to minister to people. But this is one of the first incidents where Jesus is showing them how to do something. And what was he showing them how to do? He was showing them, my people need healing, don't they? My people need work on the inside. My people need to do that on the inside, which only I can do. So people need deliverance from oppression, from demonic spirits. People who are possessed, people who their lives are oppressed by the enemy, and they need to be delivered. And I'm going to show you how to do it. And part of that is that, as we see here, it's an act of mercy on Jesus' part. He doesn't have to do it, does he? He doesn't have to heal people. He didn't have to heal people. He didn't have to set people free. But it was showing them, as a part of the work and ministry that he was doing, is that he was showing them mercy, wasn't he? He was showing them mercy, showing them grace by allowing them to heal. And this is, listen to this last verse here in verse 19. as we get into this. He come down to hear and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were being cured. And the people were trying to touch him. And this is really important, this last part of verse 19. For power was coming from him and healing them all. In other words, the idea there when I was studying for this was there was an overflowing power that kept coming and kept going, like even more so than it was even needed. The power of the Holy Spirit was working through Jesus in order to heal, in order to set free, in order to deliver the people. And so it was a grace, it was sort of like the idea of conveying of a grace of power overflowing to the people and showing them mercy and showing them grace to him. And one of the things I think in ministry and even work and even whatever we do is, and this is really, 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 really important. I think this is Jesus not only showing the people that they need how to heal and how to be able to deliver, but what was the attitude in which he did it in. And it goes across in everything that we do and everything that we say. Do we show people grace? Do we show people mercy? Do we show people when we're doing things at ministry, do we do it because we have to, because it's an obligation? Or we do it because we do it out of love and mercy and grace? And that's the thing that Jesus was showing the people. Because that last verse tells us that. Because it says, for power was coming from him and healing them all. Power was coming from him and healing them all. And so it was like, again, that overflowing power. It was just like bubbling over. It was just like overflowing, and more so than it was even needed, because he was showing grace to the people. And if you look at every time that Jesus healed, every time that Jesus delivered, as we're going to look, it was always out of grace, because he was showing what? Compassion for whom? The people. He was showing mercy for whom? The people. And that's the same attitude that he was trying to convey to his apostles. Because once they take over the church and he's gone, if they're going to continue to minister to people, what type of attitude are they going to need to have? They're going to need to have compassion, aren't they? They're going to need to be able to show mercy, aren't they? They're going to need to be able to be patient with people, aren't they? Because could you imagine all these throngs of people, and you can get overwhelmed with that, and you can get impatient with that. Can you imagine that? All the people coming at you, I'm tired, I can't do it anymore. But yet Jesus was ministering to them and showing them the reality that, hey, you know what? Even in the midst of when there's people coming, you still need to show them grace. You still need to be patient with them. You still need to be kind with them. You still need to show them compassion. And that's so important in ministry, folks. It's so important in our Christian lives, because, folks, in our world today, and all of us will agree with this, is that our world seems like it's getting colder and more impersonal and people are becoming more mean. You see it on Facebook, you see it in the comments they make, the attitudes they give to people. It can become more indifferent. And it seems like as time goes on, the meaner people get. The less compassionate, the less caring, the less merciful people are. And see, Jesus knew all that, and Jesus knew how people are, and Jesus knew the tendencies of people, and so that's why he knew that he had to disciple his people that were going to take over his church to do what? To show compassion, to show mercy, to show kindness and patience with people. And not look at people as a burden. Sometimes we can do that. Rather than just showing that they need love just like we do. They need love and mercy just like we all do, and compassion, don't we? I do, I need it all the time. I can be a knucklehead. I can really be a knucklehead. I can. I know me. And we need to be the same way with others. You know, and I think that that's important. peace, because that's what he was teaching his apostles. And so his apostles are going to teach those who are going to follow him, and then they're going to teach them, and they're going to teach them, and they're going to teach them, and them, and them. You see how the reciprocal approach is? See, and that's really, 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 really important for us to be able to follow. So when we're making decisions, really important decisions, like this decision was one of the key decisions in the life of Jesus. Who's going to take over the church once I'm gone? And this is probably, sometime before he was even going to be going, but Jesus was already thinking about this. Prayer. Take time, extended time in prayer. Choose wisely the way the Father has shown you to choose. Don't be Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will do what? And he will direct your steps. Read that verse, those verses. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. You trust what God shows you. You follow what he does. You trust him, and he'll lead you, and he'll guide you, and help you make that right decision, won't he? And then disciple people. Show people the right way to go. Because if you're spending time in prayer and you're choosing right wisely, and and others are following you after you, you're going to show them the right way to go and do it the right way. Not the wrong way. Do it the right way. And in this case, the right way is to do what? To show compassion, to show mercy, to show grace when we're doing things, when we're teaching people, when we're discipling people, and we're directing people. Because that's what the world needs to see. And that's why I want to encourage us today. Take time to pray. Pray, 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 pray. I forget who it was, but when I was in seminary, I learned about this gentleman. I forget who he was, but I think he might have been one of the apostles or one of the early church leaders. But he was known for having camel knees. You ever see the knees on camels? They're big, wide, gnarly, big, wide things. And the reason why they call that man Calvary is because he spent so much time in prayer. Because he knew where to go, make a decision. He knew where to go to find his help and to find his strength. And that's the same place we do. I need to improve my prayer time with the Lord. I need to improve it in myself. And so each one of us do too. Because when we do, we're going to make better decisions, we're going to make better choices, and we're going to be better people, and we're going to teach. We're going to treat others better, and we're going to teach others how to treat others better as well. Amen?